just go over the origins of Norwegian in the Family, how it evolved, and how the central idea evolved. Because I know that you've shared a few things with me and others of how you had an initial plan for Norwegian, how the scope gradually became larger and larger, and the LSD section, chapter 54, was added in after some contemplation.
Well, it's the third book of what became the New York Quartet. Originally, when I did Tumbleweeds, it was a standalone book, and it was supposed to be just my fictive version of the memoirs that I did, True Life. And so I did that, but then the character of Manny Cole, I decided to carry him over, just as I had moved from the neighborhood of Ridgewood to Glendale as a kid. So too, I had Manny Cole move, although Manny Cole is, I think, 5 years older than me, but the events take place like 3 years earlier. So he's a little bit older in experiencing things than I am in the various books. That became then the Vincetti brothers, which was based upon three brothers that I knew in New York that were all fucked up from a fucked up family. Their father reputedly had gone to jail or been killed, and we talked about that. And then after I did uh, Vincetti Brothers as a sequel to Tumbleweeds, I was thinking, well, I haven't pushed it far enough. The Vincetti Brothers was the first book that I used total immersion as a technique in, and I decided, well, I can push it even further. I knew that I hadn't reached the apex of that in terms of just sort of pulling the dough out. And so I decided that I was going to write another book. Initially, I was thinking it wouldn't be as long. I was thinking it's going to be maybe 250, 300,000 words, and it'll be a sequel. What I did know is that instead of being sort of this sort of searing psychological portrait that the Vincetti Brothers is, because it focuses mostly on Gino. Uh, I wanted this to be sort of set in the 1960s and sort of be Technicolor, uh, and it was going to be much more joyous. It A Norwegian in the Family is a dark comedy. Uh, there's a lot of violence and there's a lot of drama in it, but ultimately it's a humorous book. It's a dark comedy. It's more in line with Doctor Strangelove than the Vincetti brothers, which is more in line with like Rocco and his brothers. It's which is more of a melodrama. Like I said, I've always thought that book would be a black and white film. This one would be a grand Technicolor 1960s film. And as I was doing it, and I got doing it, I just found it took me 9 months to write the 600,000 words of Vincetti Brothers. It took me 17 months to do the 465,000 word um, Norwegian book. The Norwegian book uses probably anywhere between 6 to 800,000 words of other people's text reused and recycled in different ways. So original words is probably about 2/3 of that book, so about maybe 1.5 to 1.6 million. So it's still a huge novel. But when I eventually took the other stuff, like stuff from Robinson Crusoe or stuff from all these other books and novels and anarchist speeches and whatnot, I did change things. So when you, but that's later on. We'll talk about that more. But I found though, as I started writing and got to 250, 300,000 words, I was just basically scratching the surface. And I said, this is going to be a long ass book. This is going to be bigger than the Vincetti brothers. Then I thought, well, maybe it'll only be 4 or 500,000. Once I got to about 500,000, I said, this is going to be way bigger than the Vincetti brothers. And then I got to about 900,000. I said, oh, this is going to be 1 million. I was like, well, I know that. I mean, there have been gag novels that have been written, like Henry Darger, this bullshit, terrible writer, gimmick writer, this nut who wrote they call it primitive art, primitive writing. He wrote a book about 10 million words. There's been some people who've written novels, supposedly 20 million words, but they're gag books where it's like one word typed all over. So there's a book called the Blah Book, and then I said, well, I said this is probably going to go past, and I actually quote from a few of the longer books uh, uh, in here, but I said, well, this is probably going to go past Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, or In Search of Lost Time, which is generally regarded as the longest real literary novel of any repute. And that was like 1,258,000. Once I got to about 1,000,000 words, I could see I was still nowhere near the end. And I said, oh, this is going to go on. And and then it just expanded. When I did the long chapter 54, a part of that I was at about 900,000 words. I was at about the 900,000 word mark in about the fifth or sixth draft, fourth, fifth, sixth draft. I think I did 16 total drafts of the book. Plus, there were other little drafts in between, like I'd have draft 12.3 or something. Um, and then I did this chapter, and I said, wait a minute, this is the perfect thing. The chapter is called like something like Bit in Lit or Bit of Lit. And and the character of Bit von Rheingold, who came from his own book, he was a perfect tie-in because, he was a pornographer. Pornography was run by the mob. He was perfect to just seamlessly weld into the narrative, making him friends with Big Frank. So you have a trio of friends in the book: Big Frank, Andy Warhol, and Bit von Rheingold, which is like one of the most bizarre trios you're ever going to get in literature. And so then I had him go through these adventures. He drops LSD with Roger Corman and Dennis Hopper and a couple of other like big titted bimbos, and Bit just goes off into his own world. He meets a playwright, Clifford Odets, some other real life people. He goes through the tale of Genji and about 2 or 3 dozen other novels. He encourages Tom Sawyer to bang Anne of Green Gables, that kind of thing. So it's kind of funny. But as far as like the start of the book with Pauly, I had referred to Pauly Marrivelli and his death in both Tumbleweeds and the Vincetti Brothers. The Vincetti Brothers even starts with the line, Pauly Marrivelli was dead. And he had appeared in a couple of short stories, but he never appeared in a novel. And so, like, Jessica thinks the main character of this book, even though it's titled A Norwegian in the Family, ostensibly you'd think it would be the Norwegian. Then there's also the Mule, which is part of the Foundation, which I grafted from Asimov's book, and the guy who's obsessed with that calls his criminal organization the Foundation. Then there's Bit von Rheingold, who has the most actual words devoted to him in the book, mostly because of the chapter 54. And then Jessica thinks it's Big Frank because ultimately Big Frank seems to, at the end of the book, be the main character. But I think Pauly Marrivelli is the main character of the book. He's also character zero in the Schneiderverse, fictive Schneiderverse. Everything seems to revolve around Pauly Marrivelli, and event zero is the death of Pauly Marrivelli, the killing of Pauly Marrivelli. Everything seems to lead up to that, and everything seems to come out of that afterwards. And this will be when I've done some books like this later spy book, you get a sense of that too. But so anyway, that's the general beginnings of the book, and the first book is the books, the 4 books within the book of A Norwegian in the Family, which is the book that contains The Norwegian in the Family, written by Manny Cole. So basically, you have 4 books within the book written by Manny Cole within the book that I wrote. So you have
That's
Paul.
an interesting distinction that you made there, though, with the main character, because I would argue perhaps the most important character is the Manny Cole-Dan Schneider relationship throughout the book, and the metaphysical strain
Yeah.
the book contains, more so than any of the characters in between, simply because chapter 54 and then in later sections, you can feel the strain go on. And
What?
A Norwegian in the Family, and I think it begins in this opening disclaimer and onward about how you've used a better title with A Norwegian in the Family, and you see the strains from that early on.
Yeah, but it should be said, the Manny Cole from in the first book is one of the 3 child narrators. We find out though in Tumbleweeds there's a 4th narrator called the Legend Teller. Well, who is the Legend Teller? That's never made clear. And one of the things I do very well in my books is the use of different narrators. For example, in my spy book that I just finished, I reuse a couple of aspects from the Norwegian and tell it from a different point of view. And there are conflicts between Manny Cole's version that you read in the Norwegian and the stuff that's told by the spy, Elias Walk, in my spy book. But so Manny Cole emerged as a meta character in the Vincetti Brothers, in which he argues with my fictive doppelganger as to who's the author of Vincetti Brothers. We find out, though, that and here's the influence. I was greatly influenced by Hermann Hesse's works, his 3 or 4 great books, 25 years ago in my early mid-20s when I read them. And Steppenwolf starts off with the finding of the manuscript of the Steppenwolf's life. So the book Steppenwolf contains within it the written works of the Steppenwolf. That's clear here. I mean, I've never been one to. I freely admit where my influences and sources are. So that's taken from Steppenwolf and Hermann Hesse. So we find out that one of the other meta characters is the editor. I forget her name. There's a female
Elaine
editor.
Shore.
Yeah, Elaine. What?
Elaine Shore.
Yeah, right. Elaine Shaw is the editor of, I forget the name of the press. And people will say, how can you forget your book?
Well, Elysium Press.
Yeah, Elysium Press. So I've written so many works and whatnot, it's hard to keep track of it. But yeah, so she is within the book of A Norwegian in the Family, talking about the publication of The Norwegian in the Family. Another meta thing is, in this book, we find out, for example, that Big Frank has died. In the very beginning of the book, we find out that Big Frank has been killed in 2014. And he's been killed basically because elements of the Marrivelli family have found out after 40-some years, 46 years, that he was responsible for Pauly's death because they read it within the Vincetti Brothers. So we have people reading books, just as in the Vincetti Brothers, we have this little Mobius strip of reading about, for example, Henry Matsumi within the Vincetti Brothers. Henry Matsumi is a fictional character, but we also see Henry Matsumi in his books, and he's my Japanese kid alter ego that's outside of the New York series of works, has read in one of the books called The Scorpion Swam. He's reading, I believe, the Vincetti Brothers or A Norwegian in the Family, or one of those books, or maybe it's Tumbleweeds. So you have that Mobius strip. So I'm constantly twisting what reality is in there. And this is without a doubt the grandest example of that. And so, anyway, that's part of it. Manny Cole becomes more meta, but Manny Cole, we find out, is in a coma in this book. We find out in the 4th book, which is only 100,000 words, and basically is a series of related short stories that tie things up, that Manny Cole has actually died. And Manny Cole, just like Big Frank, the reason Manny Cole is in a coma and then dies is because he's been attacked by the Marrivelli family, because he's revealed this, supposedly. So you have this whole twisting of the meta thing.